Mike, great to have you, man. As always, want to jump in just because I feel like a few weeks ago when you had that article that got so much attention with regard to how guys were feeling in the locker room about the quarterback situation. Let's extend that now. George Kittle in Atlanta. I see some guys not trying as hard as they should. Kittle and Ayuk last week. Hey, we got players who aren't getting the ball. Jimmy Ward yesterday. Hey, I don't know about being a nickel corner. This is the last year of my contract. I'm just being a team player. Is the 49er locker room down this year versus recent years? There he is. There he is. Go ahead, Mike. Yeah, go ahead. Now you're on.
Well, first of all, when you're losing, people get frustrated, so that's normal. Secondly, we lived in this weird situation where everything was on Zooms and in press conference settings during the pandemic, and some of us who have phone numbers and relationships were able to report things outside of that during that time, and fans just didn't want to hear it or assumed it couldn't possibly have happened because, we saw the press conference and we know that this happened in a training camp practice because somebody was counting completion percentage or whatever. But in a more normal world where we have access to people in potential one-on-one settings, you're going to find out more. So it's a combination of increased access and frustration over losing. Do I think it's some crisis situation independent of that? No. I had a column that ran yesterday where Jimmy Ward basically said they weren't as prepared as they should have been against the Chiefs, so you could read into that as well. But bottom line is you have a lot of proud people. They're all in. They have a belief that they are Super Bowl caliber, and they're 3-4 with 3 bad losses on paper and a whooping by the Chiefs. And so, you better believe there's frustration. You're seeing it in Green Bay, you're seeing it in Tampa, and you're seeing it with the Rams as well.
And the beauty of this year's NFL, though, is you're one win away from, hey, we're back in the playoff picture, just like that. Mike, I want to ask you about how a locker room is lost. And I'm not saying this locker room has been lost by Kyle Shanahan, but you've been in enough locker rooms to where you've seen a coach lose a locker room. How does that happen? Does it happen in drips and drops, or does it happen all at once?
It depends. But a coach can lose a locker room if the players don't believe the coach, if the players believe there's either inconsistency or a deviation from the message, a sharp deviation, or if, but usually when a coach is perceived as genuine and real and truth-telling, it goes a lot better. And I think Kyle Shanahan falls into that camp squarely. So that's the good news. But, when a team underperforms and you have a lot of proud people in that locker room, it's natural for frustration to fester. And, certain locker room cultures, invite players to kind of voice it. The great Seahawks teams of the last decade, the Ravens have a culture where that's more tolerated. And then you have cultures like the Patriots where, it's there, but everybody is scared of a legendary coach and how he might react if they say something that he doesn't like. But, regardless of the culture, losing breeds it. And again, we have a situation where you're finally having players and media people interact in a more normal way. So I just believe naturally you're going to see all kinds of emotions and thoughts coming out that weren't coming out for a while. And, fans out there say they want access and want to hear from players and coaches of the teams they love, but then sometimes when that happens, it freaks them out because then, there might be things going on that they don't see on the surface, and that disrupts their sense of all-knowing fandom.
Mike Silver with us here on Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Mike, Jaquiski Tartt, former 49ers, the only one who put sort of a face on this over the last couple of weeks when he sort of insinuated that the 49ers hit too much and do too much in training camp. The Eagles didn't do that, and maybe that's why the injury bug keeps hitting them. Here we are now, Deebo Samuel, a question mark for this weekend. Have you talked to anybody on this particular team that seems to put something other than dumb luck on injuries?
No, but, that's kind of a long-running, football conundrum, right? You've got the coaches who believe you can't get football ready without contact, and in today's era, there's so few opportunities to have padded practices relative to the old days that, you need to maximize those to get into shape, and then you have coaches who believe it's not worth it because it subjects you to undue injury risk, but it's not necessarily a correlation. If you told me that Bill Parcells was coaching one team under the old rules and running the Oklahoma drill and grinding guys into submission versus, someone coaching under the new rules where you're barely hitting and one team was getting injured and the other wasn't, then I would say, okay, maybe we can, talk about that. I think, what you're seeing just in general is a shift toward a new way of preparing. And, let me give you an example. Last year, the Raiders had a little bit of a renaissance under Rich Bisaccia after John Gruden was fired. And he did a great job. Greg Olson and Gus Bradley, his coordinators, did a great job. They had adverse, circumstances. Gruden's abrupt firing, the Henry Ruggs situation. It was a lot. But talking to guys on that team, one of the things that changed was that Gruden was a much more old school coach and liked to hit in practice and be a little more physical and grind on players. And Rich Bisaccia pulled it back, and they felt fresher. And so these teams that had faded down the stretch in recent years were suddenly finding a little more juice in those during that stretch run and ended up getting into the playoffs and giving the Bengals a great run for their money. So that would be an example of when dialing it back can really be a benefit. I'll dig into this a little more as I talk to people, but yeah, I am not sensing some sort of crazy, desperate situation in the locker room where people are turning on each other. Offense is turning on defense. They're down on the coaches more than they usually would be down on bosses who grind them. But I am sensing a lot of frustration because they're not winning. They obviously are geared to win now. It could all blow up. You saw the all-in trade on McCaffrey. It could all go really bad if it goes bad. And I think, when you get embarrassed like that, albeit by Patrick Mahomes and a really good team, you start to get pretty upset.
Back-to-back bad defensive games for this 49er squad. And I think back, and I was reading your piece, Mike, and you put it so well, 27 days ago from when the game comes this Sunday, they dominated the Rams. But it feels like this defense is a different group now. Can you pinpoint why this defense is a little bit different after the last couple of weeks?
Well, I'll give them a pass on Atlanta. They really only gave up 21 points. 7 of those were scoop and score. They did get pounded, but they really were impacted by injuries, and I'll give them a pass on that one. But obviously, what we saw Sunday was brutal. I think schematically and physically, they got dominated. They really miss Eric Armstead a lot and Kinlaw on the inside. They obviously, had gotten a different Charvarius Ward those first 5 weeks than they got in this game against his former team. But, honestly, I just don't know. I think they have so many good players on offense and defense that they should be better than that. And the Rams are they're the Super Bowl champs, but they are a reeling team. They lost their left tackle, Joe Noteboom. The line was already a disaster. They may get Brian Allen, their center back, but the line is rough. They over-target Cooper Kupp, I think out of necessity, and Tyler Higbee to some degree. They paid Allen Robinson a bunch of money. He's been a non-factor. They're hoping Van Jefferson could come back and give them a little juice, and they really can't run the ball. So that offense is there for the taking. By the way, Matthew Stafford, 8 interceptions, second only to Matt Ryan. So the 49ers, if their defense is close to what they believe it is, they ought to be able to jump on a team like that again. Now, there will be adjustments. It's not the same as the first game, and they've got obviously some great players, starting with Cooper Kupp. But on paper, if you didn't know the Rams had won the Super Bowl and you didn't know the names and you just looked at their film for the first 6 games, you'd go, yeah, this team should swallow that team up and do really, really well. So we'll see what happens.
Mike, speaking of all that, I know you've got your most recent article saying that the 49ers will go as far as their defense takes them. Can you expand on that? And if you're led by defense, can that even work anymore in this NFL?
Well, could you go into Lambeau Field and win a playoff game where you don't give up any, what is it, 7 points in that game? So, yeah, I mean.
Right, but could you beat the Chiefs and the Bills?
I mean, the offense didn't carry them in that game. They, special teams got the winning touchdown, and defense was defense. And that was against Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau Field in the playoffs. So, yeah, the Chiefs and the Bills, I hear you. But, they're looking at last year's blueprint, which is a dangerous game to play. Last year they were 3-5 and lifeless. And then they shook it up with Devo running the ball and Armstead moving inside, and they got on a run with no margin for error. Jimmy Garoppolo, let me remind you, was down 7 points at the end of the regular season with a playoff berth on the line, and they had to drive down the field, force overtime, and win just to get in. They won in Dallas, fueled by defense. They won in Green Bay, fueled by defense. They were on the verge of beating the Rams, fueled by defense, when a player you mentioned earlier in the segment regrettably did not catch an interception. That wasn't the only reason, but I'll just remind people they were on the verge of going to the Super Bowl, and I think having a great chance of winning it with that blueprint. Do I think it's an optimal way to approach life against Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes? If you get that far, not necessarily, but they're obviously mindful of it. They brought Jimmy Garoppolo back when they knew it would cause potential drama because they had to hedge on their quarterback plan. They just traded 4 picks for a boutique running back receiver mismatch guy, which is awesome. He's a explosive player, Christian McCaffrey, but that's an all-in on offense trade. And they have 2 receivers they really, really like, and a tight end that they pay a ton, who's a great blocker and a playmaker. So it's not as simple as, the defense will carry them, the offense will do nothing. They're obviously mindful of it, but I just don't see a team, based on what I've seen, that can go out and go touchdown for touchdown with the best offenses in the league. And they're not fast. And that's, that's Kyle's prerogative. That's the way he thinks he can best take advantage of opposing defenses. But, they got the ball with 10:42 remaining in Atlanta, down 14, and sucked 8 minutes off the clock. Didn't score, by the way. They're not a tempo team. So the Bills and Chiefs are like boom, 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 score, score, score when they need to. The 49ers are not constructed that way. They're, they have a fullback, and they, try to come at you heavy and grind you down and out-scheme you, and it's cool. But if they're going to win, it's going to be more of an old-school approach, and that's defense-driven.
Yeah, Mike, I get that. Yeah, no one's ever going to accuse the 49ers of being in a hurry. And so maybe we should take the season.
But they are in a hurry to win now.
To win, yeah, I get it.
Made the most aggressive. I mean, they've arguably made the 2 most aggressive trades, if you look at capital, since March of 2021.
Yeah.
They traded 3 ones to get from, or they traded, depends on, this is a terminology.
Oh, we love this one, Mike.
They used 3 first-round picks to get from 12 to 3.
Yep.
And take a guy who played at North Dakota State, and they just traded a 2, 3, 4 next year at a 5 for a beaten-up running back who, theoretically could juice up their offense. So they're trying.
Yeah. I like the first time that you talked about Christian McCaffrey. This time you called him beat up. The first time you called him boutique, which is a fun word.
He's a beat up boutique.
If you said if you said we can get Derrick Henry 3 years ago, that's not boutique. That's identity. That's the best running back in football who will change your offensive identity. Christian McCaffrey, he's had great days as a running back that seem to be waning because of injuries. He is really explosive and can give you big plays, but it's more of a, wow, we could split him and we could split him wide. We could motion him into the slot. We could really mess with those defenses, and that's cool, but they give up a lot.
2,000 touches between Stanford and Carolina. So, yeah, that's a lot of tread off those tires. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, great stuff, Mike. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you next week.
I appreciate it.
All right, there it is. Mike Silver on the 49ers, San Francisco Chronicle.
He's a beat-up boutique.